Welcome everybody to the Learning to Birth webinar series, where we interview some of the world's most interesting and inspiring thought leaders about birth, pregnancy, and the postpartum. Today we have with us Patrick Hauser. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
Yay. So Patrick is a grandfather and father of two sons. It was the birth of Patrick's first son, which revealed to him the need to understand birth more fully. Patrick's second son arrival in 1980 was the first documented water birth in the USA, and this informed Patrick's life work and led him to nearly 25 years of passionate advocacy for birth choices. Patrick is the author of Fathers-to-be Handbook, published in the UK and available in the USA as well. This is phenomenal. Thank you for joining us, Patrick.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I am so stoked that your water birth was the first water birth to be documented in the US. And I know you've mentioned elsewhere like that you were on the Donahue show and stuff about it. I think I actually watched that as a kid. Like I know because I probably saw every episode of Donahue because my parents watched it, and I'm sure I've seen you and the water birth story on Donahue like as a kid.
It was interesting because shows like that, they stock the audience for controversy. So they had nurses and doctors' wives and medical kind of people in the audience, because this was 1981 when we were on the show, and they, there weren't, home birth midwives weren't really above the radar, and so anyway, that's who was in the audience. So what we normally did when we did public talks and such was we would bring people in and introduce them and educate them a bit first, and then we would show the video because we have a video of the birth. Well, Phil Donahue showed the video first before we even came out, and so the whole audience quit breathing. I mean, wow. They just, because nobody had ever heard of it before, and here's this baby underwater. I'm holding my son and he's underwater, right? And it's like fear just went nuts. And so we took a little while to calm them down.
Like, what do they think they're doing when they're in the mum's belly,
I know. I say, what's the big deal? He's got a new apartment. He's been underwater 9 months and a few minutes,
Amniotic fluid. Hello. This is like a big... Yeah.
Well, the president of the ACOG, which is the American Gynecological and Obstetric Association here, the very president was on the show too. And he tried to make get down with us, right? And he said, well, you could have had a water embolism. And we educated ourselves pretty well in advance. And I said, well, excuse me, doctor, but with respect, if there was going to be a water embolism, there would have been an air embolism if it was an air birth, right? He goes, well, yes, I suppose so. There has to be. There's going to be one. There's going to be the other. It depends on the environment you're in. It's not caused by the environment you're in. And he just kind of coughed and choked and shut up, And then Phil is holding my son at this point, and he's going, well, I don't know, Doc. He looks pretty healthy to me,
The real inspiration for my second birth was probably watching those Russian water birth movies, like the Birth into Being movies, and just, they didn't go for half an hour, but oh my God, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
And I just was like, yeah, okay, we can do this. Now to have, that be documented, that, and have, the cameras and everything there in your private space, as your family giving birth, never happened before in America. Like that, you must have been an amazing dad to envisage that and hold the space for that. What was that experience like for you? What led you there, like in terms of knowing, I can be present with my wife and my children as this happens?
Well, our first birth was at home in the Missouri Ozarks, which is a very remote area of the United States. And we had a local midwife, which it was illegal at that time in Missouri. And, but it was a day and a half labor and 12 hours of pushing. And when he came out, he wasn't breathing and she was bleeding. And I mean, it was heroic. It was just, and we were living the good life in the country, eating well, had a supportive community, blah, blah, And it was devastating to us emotionally. We just didn't have a clue what was going on. How could something have an ending like this that was so well prepared for and loved and cared and all of that. And then in the ensuing year and two, we started doing some therapeutic work, because what was revealed to us was the emotional side, the emotional component of birth, which we did not have a clue about. This was early days in that whole field. And so we did an age regression, the mother of my children did. And in that process, she re-experienced her own birth. She went back to her own birth, and she identified the identical emotional environment when she gave birth as when she was born.
Yeah.
And we went, holy smokes, is this a coincidence or a clue? You know, and of course it was a clue. And the whole field of pre and perinatal psychology was being developed at that time. It hadn't even been named, actually. But, you know, Suzanne Arms came out with her book on, you know, immaculate deception. And Frederick Laboyer came out with his book, Birth Without Violence.
Beautiful.
And it was just, you know, all this information was coming to the front that birth matters. It's really significant. And what we learned in the therapeutic environment is we all have a navel. We've all been present at the birth. And by the way, at birth, there's more brain cells pairing up than at any time in our life. Yeah. And when brain cells pair up, that's when memory occurs. So why on earth is it we don't have a conscious memory of our birth? Well, we also have a defense mechanism built in that can create amnesia if need be. You have a car wreck and you don't remember the wreck. You wake up in the hospital, things like that. So we have a very clever anatomy and physiology and psychology that, you know, kind of takes care of us in a way. But because you don't consciously remember something, it doesn't mean it's not running in the background. Just like with your computer, you can have a program in there that's running, a virus that can be running and doing bad things behind the scenes. And so the same thing with our unconscious thoughts. They're running in there. And so what was happening with my wife, the mother of my child at that time, was that program was running. And she was terrified when she went into birth. She was absolutely terrified because she was reflecting unconsciously on her own birth. And to people without a background in this may sound a little funny, but this was our experience. And there's been thousands of others having similar experiences. Yeah. And so, you know, she relived that, then we worked on that therapeutically and moved beyond it. And then a friend sent us a clipping of Tchaikovsky in Russia doing the waterbirths. A week later, we were pregnant. And we went, another coincidence or clue. Yeah. And so we went on, you know, we couldn't get, there was no internet. We couldn't Google it. We couldn't, you know, and there was no place we could go or way to figure out what to do. So we just sort of intuited it and did the best we could with what we had, and ended up with a 90-minute labor and a loving, caring, supportive environment. And I turned our garage, our attached garage, into a birthing room and had a big fiberglass jacuzzi, and I built a bed platform right next to it. So if she didn't feel like being in the water, we were out of the water. You know, there was no question about we're gonna do it this way. No, we're gonna do it the way it's meant to be done, the way it wants to be done. You know, and we did, and it was fabulous.
How many dads, go to so much effort, build a whole room, oh my God, in for this specific purpose. This is beautiful. Like you've written your book, The Fathers to Be Handbook. Do you want to tell us a bit? Yeah, there we go. And you've got a great website and a community there. Do you want to tell us a bit about what your mission is?
Well, my personal life mission, it's interesting, this has come up a couple of times in the last couple of days. And I became aware of this decades ago in, I don't know if it was some kind of a workshop I was doing or what it was, but what I came up with is my purpose is to be truly helpful. Very simple. And that's whether I'm going to the mailbox or dealing with a client or writing my book or whatever it is I'm doing. That's my stable point, that's my North Star. And so I moved to England about 20 years ago, and the woman I went to be with, Benny Dansby, who has a great website, Benny A. Dansby, Ecstatic Birth, was involved in therapeutic work in England, in 3 or 4 different countries actually, with adults using breath work to help people integrate life better and feel healthier and all of that. And so it was sort of, I guess, a dozen or so years ago, we were at one of our retreats, and we were having a morning circle, and across the circle was a good friend of mine, a man who had become a friend of mine, who had just become a new father. Well, so he's a new father and I'm a grandfather, and we're sitting across the circle from each other, and everybody's sharing whatever they're sharing. And he shared that someday he found it so fascinating because he was very much in tune with his emotions, and he found it so amazing, the process of becoming a father, that someday he might like to work with expectant dads. Well, when that came out of his mouth, every cell in my body woke up. I just went, oh my God, from your mouth to my ears, to my heart. So after that gathering, I just went out and grabbed him by the collar and said, Elmer, we've got to do this, and he agreed.
That's fantastic.
However, the challenge was, so this is a great story. When we came back from that retreat, I don't know, 8 or 10 days later, I went to my computer, fired it up, hadn't used it in that period of time, went right to Google. And the way you find out the whole truth in Google is you put brackets, quotes around your phrase, right?
Yeah.
So I put fathers to be, and I put it in quotes. Google came back and said, and I've got a screenshot of this, came back and said, did you mean mothers to be? No reference found. No, this was 12, 13 years ago. No reference found. Mind you, Google can't lie. It's all algorithm. It's all bits of information. There was not a single reference to fathers to be on the web.
Before coming here, I did a search in a special website called Answer the Public, and I put in fathers childbirth, 0. Fathers birth, 0. It had nothing to tell me. Everything else I've ever put in that told me hundreds of things, but within that, nothing. So it's what we're doing today is changing things. I think this is important.
You can Google fathers to be now and you'll get thousands of references.
Yeah.
But back, and so I was like, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was like, I've got a lifetime of work ahead of me, or 3 or 4 lifetimes, it's like, my God, look at all of this. And so Elmer and I designed this course, a 3-day course for expectant dads, right? We were going to just walk them right through the whole deal. Could not get a quorum. They don't have a bump. They're not sitting in a coffee shop talking to their best friends about the pregnancy, right? You just try and go out on the street and try and find an expectant dad. Try and run an advert and see how many answer. This is 13 years ago, right? They'd never been offered anything.
Yeah.
This whole thing that was going on. So I started searching the web going, how is it possible that phrase is not being used? And I went to midwifery sites and doula sites and childbirth education sites and hospital sites and doctor sites and obstetrician sites. I went to all these sites. Absolutely nobody was using the phrase fathers to be. And that's our cultural phrase for expectant dads, right? So I wrote an article called, go ahead, use the F word, father. And it's like, because what I found out is they were going birth partners, rest of the family, other family members. They were trying to be kind of politically correct to the women's movement and the women being the ones having the baby. Yes. But guess what? Who's the #1 support person for the mother? It's the father if there's a male-female relationship. And if he's not being supported, that means she's not being supported. I mean, it's really simple math. And if he doesn't have a clue, then where does that lead? It leads to fear. Fear is the default setting if we don't have safety and security in whatever it is we're doing. I don't care if it's filing your taxes or going to a birth. If you don't feel safe in the environment, it's not going to work very well. So that's kind of my prime thing, is to help. And so what we did was we tried to have these workshops for dads and could not get guys in the room. There was just, we couldn't find them. And so finally went to a friend of ours who was an antenatal education teacher, and she did couples classes. And so on a Thursday night, she had I think 6 couples, and she just said, okay, all you guys come back to the same room on Saturday. No cost, just come back. There's going to be a dad's class. And they go, what's that? Nobody had ever offered anything like this before. And she goes, well, I don't know, but I trust these guys. I trust them, and they're doing something really wonderful.
Yeah. So
six guys showed up for 2 hours. That's all we had with them. And we just took them as far as we could take them. And we didn't really, this was in England. We didn't know how far we could take them. English, a little reserved, a little not expressive, but we just kind of held them by the hand, metaphorically, and took them on this journey, because guys don't realize they're going to have an experience. And birth professionals don't realize they're going to have an experience. Obstetricians, midwives, whoever's in the birthing room, nurses, they don't realize dad's having an experience too. Dads need to be supported so dads can be better support for mothers. I mean, it's not, you don't take away from one if you give to another, So, so the workshop just went fabulous. And the next day I did exit interviews with all the guys. 5 out of 6 said, if there'd been a flyer, if you had told us what we were going to do before we came, we never would have come. And we are so grateful. Every single one of them said, I am so grateful, because I had no clue, not a clue. And we just taught them all sorts of little tricks and things to be aware of, and how to check in, and how to feel safe, and what about certain dimensions of this thing you don't know anything about. 90 whatever % of men have never been to a birth except their own.
Yeah.
Which brings up my first topic we talked about. That can very well be stirred up as well in the mother and in the father. Yeah. So there's these layers to it.
Yes.
And, all we can do is all we can do. And more is better as far as supporting the new families.
Now dads-to-be can come to your website, take your courses, read your book. But what sort of information do dads-to-be really need to know? Like, what do they need to know?
Well, there's for the birth itself, there's 4 things. I call them the 4 biggies. And one is pain. Now, what I know is that not all births are painful. My friend Deborah Pascali-Bonero made a film called Orgasmic Birth and wrote a book.
Great movie. Great book.
Fabulous. The film is not necessarily about the big O. It's how are we supporting mothers and fathers, And yes, women do have orgasms during birth. A certain percentage do. And how do they do that? Why do they do that? What's the key to that? They let go. They trust the process. They work with the energy in their body. They say yes. I'll walk up to a woman in a grocery store, and if it feels, a pregnant woman, and if it feels right, and I'm able to connect with her and she feels a little open, I'll say, when it's time to birth, remember to say yes. And she goes, they'll just get silent for a minute, and they go, oh. And you can feel it drop, They go, oh. That's the most important. If there's one word, yes, that's the word. And dads too. So what happened was, that was one of the things we told the dads at the time. And so about a month later, we had another dad's class, same place. 2 of the dads came back with their new babies. They came back, that came to the first class. One came first, just the one guy with his new baby. Baby had never been away from mother before. I mean, this was high risk for a new dad, just high risk emotionally, you know what I mean? It was so fabulous. And he sat there and they ended up having a C-section. And it was a true medical pathway, was blocked by the placenta. There was no way around it, except they still worked with yes. They integrated the process and they went with it, and the people around them supported the process properly. They had a blissful experience. And he's sitting there sharing that with a new group of guys that are going, wow, And then he was there sort of maybe 45 minutes and decided it's time to go back home, He left. A little while later, a second guy came with his new baby. He had a candlelit water birth with grandma being the doula. And it was this home, beautiful, blessed, music in the background, just this gorgeous birth. So here are these other guys coming here for this dad's class. I couldn't have hired people to come tell these stories, It was so beautiful, who were totally opposite births, having an integrated experience of feeling love and blessings, So the thing about pain is, pain is resistance, full stop, all the time, no matter what, day or night, birth or just life, pain is resistance, and particularly at birth. So if a mother can learn to open her mouth, relax her jaw, say yes with her energy, and the dad too, anybody in that room needs to feel safe, or guess what? It's going to interfere with the energy. So a woman can transform pain. She can transmute pain. And so pain is a biggie that dads need to understand. And they need to understand that if there is pain, it's creative pain. Guys understand pain from hitting their thumb with a hammer, from getting knocked down playing football, from, those kinds of things. They understand pain as injury. So if they're not pre-informed that the woman they love is in a creative state of pain rather than a damaging injury state of pain, then what's going to happen? It's just so simple, but it's just, a 5-minute conversation can transform his experience of birth by simply understanding pain.
Yeah.
So that's one. Time is another one. How long is the birth going to take? Well, how long's a piece of string? It's like the birth takes what the birth takes. And if guys know in advance that this is an organic process, it's got its own chronology. The baby's got a whole lot to do with it. And so does the mother, but nobody outside of it does, or they better not, And so it just takes how long it takes. So be patient with the process. So the other part, another one is safety. Is my lover safe and is my baby safe? Well, birth is safe. Saving, 95% of all births could happen just absolutely naturally, organically, perfectly normally without any interference. So birth is a safe process. How would he know that unless somebody tells him? What all he's ever seen is TV movies and big movies where the woman is screaming and there's an emergency and all this stuff going on. In England, the emergency room at hospitals, they call them accident and emergency. It's different in the States where I am. So I say in some of my talks, it may have been an accident, but it's not an emergency. It's like, so it's not like that. And so the other thing is noise. The woman may very well choose to be animalistic, noisy, get into that primal place, which is fabulous. She needs to express from wherever she's experiencing. And so if he doesn't know that in advance, that she just may get noisy, she just may make noises he's never heard before. If he knows that's not only okay, it's good, then he can take a breath, he can relax. So those 4 to me are just really paramount in just basic understanding.
You talk about a power toolkit for dads. Is that your power toolkit for dads, or is that something different?
No. In the book, I talk about gratitude, appreciation, forgiveness, affirmation. It's all relational because it's called Fathers to Be Handbook. But as Barbara Harper says, the founder of Waterbirth International, she says it's the best book ever written for a pregnant woman. And she recommends partners read it to each other, that they read together. Because if you change the pronoun, so much of it applies to the woman, because it's about personal development, and it's about who we are and what we want for our family, and how was I born and how was I raised, and things like that we have default settings just like our computer. Our brain has a default setting, and the default setting is our past. It's our history. It's our emotional experience from before we were born, from in utero, right the way through. I mean, there's a period called 1,001 days, which is the first 3 or so years of a child's life from conception onward. And all of those, and this has been proven 6 ways to Sunday, that all of those experiences have an influence. They have a deep emotional imprint on the child, on the future adult, future human being. And so knowing that is powerful. It's powerful in 2 ways. It's powerful knowing that we can design an environment for that child to grow and live in and be born in that is as loving and caring, as supportive as possible. It's also important to know, because if we already have a child born that is in distress, or even a teenager or an adult, then all of these emotional events typically have a trigger that preceded whatever it looks like it's about. There's usually a trigger earlier in life. And that's where some of the age regression and hypnotherapy and things like that come into play, because they can get past the subconscious barriers and let one then experience some of that stuff in a safe and controlled environment, so they can let go of those old thought patterns, because they create thought patterns that we then have an expectation to repeat. We have an expectation that life is going to hurt. We have an expectation there's not enough. We drag babies out of the womb. We immediately cut the cord. Trustfully, this has changed a lot in recent time, but to immediately cut the cord, what are we doing? Two things. We're suffocating the child, and we're depriving the child of 1/3 of their total blood volume that's in that cord and placenta. It's like, whoever came up with that? Oh, I know. It was some guy in the patriarchy, it was, and it's just nuts. And so, that practice is changing a lot now, but those very actions cause thought forms because a baby, a child, an infant, an embryo is pre-verbal, does not mean they're pre-decision making. It does not, they are capable of making complex intellectual decisions way before birth and at birth and after birth, pre-verbal. And those decisions are more impactful because they're emotion based. Yeah. They're not based on the other side of the brain that knows language and all that stuff. So it's just really critical. So when I look at this whole topic of, fatherhood, it's always a collective. It's always an integrated experience of the whole family. When my first son was born, it was a family experience. When my second son was born, it was a family experience. The before, during, and after, and that's how I like to carry the whole process, is that understanding that we're connected and we're in this together.
Yes, absolutely. I have a lot of sensitivity for the history of how we've come to be where, midwives and everything and websites might not talk about the fathers to be, because there are a lot of mums who have to do it on their own. And I'm one of them. Was. And, and you want the woman to know it's about her, because a lot of this world is about it not being about the woman, that the woman can't make a decision. She doesn't know what's right. It's not her experience. And it's been about reclaiming that. So I have a lot of gratitude that they've taken that stance. But on the other hand, it's losing an opportunity to realize that, there was a father there present at the conception. He's got his own stuff going on potentially. But what really, like, how do we want to dream? How do we want to vision that father's role going forward? How can we, give fathers that support? So I guess, like, what would you, how can a dad be present at a birth, in a positive way? What things can he do? Like, can he, his wife or his partner's going to be in a state that's, back in, like, she's not going to be thinking, judging. She's going to be very, like, primal and internal. Like, how can he be there through those experiences with her?
Well, one of the ways I talk about it is to say, do nothing but do it really well. Which is holding the space. I was teaching some midwives a number of years ago, and one of them said to me that she had a client, a woman, who the woman and the father were separated, and she was expecting very soon, and the father was insisting on being at the birth, and the mother was not feeling it. She was kind of afraid of him. They were not having a copacetic relationship. And so this midwife, wanted my opinion, and the way she worded it, she was kind of like, she was thinking he should be there. And absolutely no. He'll have his time, but I'll tell you what, if she doesn't feel safe with him, if it's not okay with her, he's not even in the hallway. He's not even in the building. He has not earned the right to be there by being in a loving relationship with her, no matter what their living relationship is or their sexual relationship is. If he can't hold the space for a loving relationship for this woman that's mothering his child, that's birthing his child, then talk to you later. That's the priority's got to be with the mother and the baby. Yeah. So I have the hardest time, because of my nature and my penchant for fathering. I have a very hard time understanding guys that just walk away. I just, whether it's when the pregnancy happens or whether it's when the kids are 3 years old or whatever, it's just after the birth, it's in a way it's more understandable, because 90% of them were unsupported. They did not have a clue. Nobody gave them the time of day. They weren't integrated into the process or the family, and, you know, so they never bonded, you know. And hey, who'd stick around if they don't feel welcome? To me, welcome is the most powerful word you can use for the father. You know, we go to visit somebody's house and they open the door and the first thing they say is welcome, you know. And if there's not a welcome energetically or verbally, then it's like, you don't really feel like going in, do you? You know, it's like, so that's the most important thing. And so, you know, guys know where the door is. And it's sad, but if he doesn't feel welcome and included and safe in the process and know what to do and what not to do, and it doesn't take, you know, a PhD. It doesn't take a lot of my book, 90 minutes to read my book. You can spend 90 minutes with it or 9 months with it. You know, it's like, because there's exercises in it. There's things to play with, to explore the inside a bit. You know, how were you fathered? How do you want to be remembered as a father? Because the way you were fathered will be your default setting unless you change the setting. That is absolute, it absolutely is. And you know what, something sort of an adjunct to this fathering thing, a guy named Warren Farrell has written lots of books about gender issues, women, men, all of that. And he wrote one recently called The Boy Crisis. He researched, you know, all of these shootings that are happening in the United States, like there's been 250 or something this year, mass shootings. Every single one of those men, and they're all men, every single one of them was from a fatherless home. Every single one. Now, a few of them had the father was in the home, but he was out to lunch. They did not have a participating father in their life. I always thought, I looked at a lot of them and said, well, the military, because that certainly creates the aggression and some of that stuff, but a lot of them weren't military. A lot of them were. He did the research. Every single one had a disappearing dad.
They've lost that anchor. They've lost that inner sense of how to transform and transmute all the energies coming up inside of them, telling them how to be a man, but they haven't got that good role model in their life to teach them where to channel those energies.
Yeah. So we have a cultural imperative. I mean, this is a giant social issue. This is giant. Hundreds of children have been killed in schools and blah, blah. You know, it's like, this is a big deal. And it really isn't that hard to shift the tide. Somebody's got to commit to doing it now instead of just putting Band-Aids on this thing. Band-Aids, Band-Aids, Band-Aids. You know, somebody's got to have the guts to just go, okay, let's start and support expectant couples. Let's properly support every expectant couple in this country, in this world, so that the babies then feel the love, the father and the mother, regardless of where their personal relationship is going. They're both engaged with that child. And once a father bonds with a child and really feels connected, he's not walking away. I mean, he just isn't. Why would he?
I guess historically we've come from, you know, centuries where even if the relationship was abusive, terrible, the woman could not walk away. And I think we've made some great changes this century that women, we can leave and we can, you know, do a whole lot of things now and get the support we need. If we know, you know, how to reach out. So I think we've made great strides there. On the other hand, now we're experiencing a situation where men know that they don't have to stick around, and women sometimes do have to leave regardless of whether the man wants to stick around or not. And that's bringing up these situations that, you know, you're talking about. I'm sure that there's a way through them. I mean, I know as a society, we can provide, you know, through men's groups and everything for teenage boys, hopefully positive, you know, ways of being role models for them and help them. I guess for a dad, and that's another thing, like if as you're saying, the man's not sticking around because he's not feeling welcome, it may be like that he's done something that the woman doesn't, like that lady that you were talking about, she doesn't feel safe with him there now. That's why he's not welcome. So what if a partner really wants to make sure, like a man, like a father-to-be wants to make sure that his pregnant partner really knows that she's safe around him, really knows that he wants to support her, whatever she's going through in this, like what can he do?
You know who Marie Mongan is, the founder of hypnobirthing? Yeah, she's a friend of mine. She recently died. But she she has a statement that I do in some of my workshops and presentations at conferences. And her statement is, I'll just paraphrase, the mother knowing that she has a loving and supportive partner is the most important aspect of their relationship or her security in birth or something. Yeah. And that's not him doing anything. Just knowing that he's there to support her is what gives her this, okay, I know he's there. So what the doing is a lot of non-doing, like I had said, do nothing but do it really well. Yes, he's going to rub her neck and rub her lower back and, some things like that. But he's not checking his phone. He's not, wondering about that baseball game or football game or whatever, those kind of things. But again, it's the preparation that allows him to be present. It's about being present. And what is it that makes you not present? Fear. Yeah. Fear will take you out any minute, any second, in any situation. And so, that's the thing. And looking into each other's eyes, I mean, as a birth professional, that the oxytocin, when the loving connection is there between two people, boom, here comes the oxytocin, which is absolutely the right medicine for a labor. Yeah. I mean, you have to have it or you're not going to have a baby. And so they're kissing, they're cuddling, ask everybody to leave the room and get down, it's like, it's so neat when we just let nature take its course instead of getting these overeducated people all involved in our lives and our personal process.
Well, we know that when a mum gives birth, like you talked about with your first birth, there's a whole lot of emotional kind of healing you have to do through your pregnancy to really prepare yourself for the labor and birth. And some of the other webinar speakers, the midwives, have talked about this. But I mean, the dad, he doesn't have to give birth to that baby, although he might be there at the labor. What can a dad do to make sure that he's emotionally fit, to be a dad by the time the baby comes around?
I guess the most important step is the commitment, on his part that no matter what, I'm here, I'm in, and then that can help to open some doorways to awareness, because the environment of birth is so charged, it's so emotional that you can't replicate it before it happens. You know what I mean? So it's a challenge to say, all right, let's do a couple of dry runs, because there's nothing like it. And he's probably not going to be at another birth and, that sort of thing, but it's commitment. It's just absolutely committed to being in the process. And also the birth professionals that are in midwives and doulas, looking him in the eye and saying, she's doing great. You're doing great. That's like really important, because how does he know what great looks like? Not a clue. And so in my book, when I talk about, how was he raised and how does he want to be as a father and things like that, and there's writing exercises too. So you can actually, delve a little farther in, because, you can have some therapeutic sessions, go, have a breathwork session, have a hypnotherapy session, even deep tissue body work to, get more in touch with your own body and your own self and your own emotions, because the train has left the station and it's going to arrive, and it's going to be a surprise. It's always a surprise because you don't have a clue what's coming, but you just got to be open to it. You just got to trust the process, and trust is just so important. Just trust the process. It's so really, really rare that it goes astray, if the proper support is provided and if there aren't a lot of medical people trying to intervene. The process really is lovely and straightforward.
Yeah. So bring awareness, bring consciousness, be willing to look at stuff and treat yourself and find, the modalities that speak to you, and just explore your life and yourself.
Yeah.
And how you came to be there and what you're wanting. If a dad or dad to be did experience abandonment, you know, in his own childhood, what can he do for himself as he becomes a father to help heal that?
Well, some therapy. There are various forms of therapy. It's just it's a challenge to do it without that in safe environment.
Yeah.
And whether the therapy is talking therapy or breathing therapy or hypnotherapy or various things, there's lots of different modalities, but that abandonment thing is just will rear its ugly head so many times you'll want to scream.
Yeah.
You know, it just, and it will, you know, it will just, you know, cause him to want to jump ship because, you know, people who are hurt people, people who are abandoned abandon people. You know, I mean, that's just how the psychology works. It doesn't answer logic. It just has a compulsion to do what it wants to do. And, you know, so.
So I guess on a positive level, you know, like what is becoming a dad feel like?
It's just a blessing. I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, here is new life in your hands. You know, here this woman you love and care for has just literally created new life.
Yeah.
You know, and this new life will change your life for the rest of your life if you let it. And that's the good news, you know. And it just takes a whole lot of surrender because every day, every week, every month, every year will be different than the one that came before in this child's life and in your relationship with them. And it takes some being present to keep up with that.
Yeah.
You know, especially when they get a little older, they go into teenage phase and things like that. Whole different dynamics going on. And so it's really tricky. And get support, have a men's group, you know, and even like at the birth, if you've got a best friend or somebody you know that's already been at a birth, had a baby, a guy and a guy, have him on speed dial. And if you need to excuse yourself out of the birthing room for a couple of minutes, go out in the hallway and say, George, I'm freaking out, man. I don't know, you know, or whatever, you know, he's got to have a place to put that, you know, and because it doesn't belong in the room. But if he just expresses it, then, okay, now let me get back in the room, you know.
I guess you can speak as well from the place of, you know, having seen the full circle of life. You're a granddad now, not just a dad, granddad.
Yeah.
Did that add an extra layer on it for you?
Yeah. Yeah, grandchildren are a different layer. Yeah. You know, they're sweet and wonderful, and you have a different relationship with them than you do with your own kids, and it's really sweet, really great.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I guess, was becoming a dad worth it?
Oh yes. You know, when I was still in England, a man from New York contacted me, and he was in film school in New York City, and he's with the girlfriend. Were they married? I'm not sure if they were married yet, but she was raring to go. She wanted to pop out babies. You know, she just, every cell in her body was like, I'm ready to have a baby. And he was like, you know, but he had enough emotional wisdom that in film school, he made his film project about becoming a dad. He found a way to work it out. So he did interviews with other couples, and then he called me, and I was supposed to be in New York at a conference, and the conference got canceled, so I didn't make it. So we were going to do an on-site interview. So instead, we did it over Skype. So a buddy of his from film school was filming him in his apartment in New York, and we had Skype set up, and then I had a camera in my flat in England, and we did this whole three-way filming thing. And so we just went on this little journey, and we had some contact beforehand, but I didn't want to have too much because we were filming it. So I wanted to see
the rawness.
Yeah, I wanted it to be real, you know? So I just asked him some leading questions about his childhood and his father. Well, Dad walked out when he was 2 years old. you know, and he didn't see him again till he graduated from high school, you know, and mom didn't have good things to say about dad. And, you know, and so there were, it just kept adding up, you know, and it was like, And so, and I didn't evaluate his answers, but just bringing him to the surface allowed him to evaluate them, you know, and it was beautiful. It was really neat. So he made this little film. I can probably send you a link to it. I've probably
love to.
I know I still have it somewhere.
Yeah, send me an email with the link.
Yeah, it's really
we'll
neat.
try and include it here in the course like that with a link beside this video so people can watch it if they want. Yeah.
And it's called I think he called it Leap Before You Look. Instead of look before you leap, it's leap before you look.
Yeah.
Because you know, I walked him through this process and to where he realized it was only fear. There was nothing real to his experience. It was an imaginary thing that he was afraid about being a father, that he might hurt the baby or this or that and that. And then once he realized some of the family stories, and he actually, in the film, he went back and visited the hospital where he was born. He was filming the room he was born in. He found some family photos of when he came home from the hospital, his mother and his father. The other thing I just remembered, he was dropped on his head. The doctor dropped him and he had a huge hematoma on his side of his head when he came home from the hospital. So you could see it in this video of mom carrying him home, right? So this kid had some trauma attached to that process. Oh my God. And it's kind of a parallel story to that. I was in Denver. When I was in England, I would come back and I would go to a state and I would do what I called my father love tour. So I went to Colorado one year and I did 4 different cities. And so I'd do a public event for parents and professionals, and then I'd do a birth professional workshop the next day. And in this one parent event in this auditorium, I don't know, 50 or 100 people in it, this one guy, Q&A time, this one guy raised his hand and said, you know, I'm a psychologist. He's a PhD psychologist, right? Sees clients. He's a therapist, right? And when his baby was born, he gets this baby in his hands and he looks at this baby and goes, who's the green-eyed monster? You know, his heart would not connect with that baby. He was like, and he was willing. He thought he was, you know, on the job and whatnot. And once that baby was out, I mean, he'd change the diaper, he'd support the mom, but it was like a zombie. He was going through the motions, but there was nothing here. He was not feeling it. And then he said it took 9 months. And finally one day, boom, his heart opened up and it just, boom. Then he bonded and everything was great. And once he stopped talking, I said, may I ask you a question? He said, yeah. I said, so what was your father like? Oh, he told me I was a worthless shit and would never amount to anything. Well, who wants to give birth to that and raise one of those? You know that, I mean, and he not only told him that in a phrase, he told him that every day of his life. You know what I mean? That's how he treated him.
Yeah.
So he had a little bit of trepidation about being a dad because that was the school he went to. You see, you go to school on being a mother or father. You go to school from the day you're conceived until the day you leave home. You're going to school. And that was what his dad taught him about being a father. And it is such a travesty that, I mean, that's the family inheritance right there. Screw the jewels and the money. That's the family inheritance, you know? And it's like, my goodness, how could we do that to our children, to our society, to our culture, to our world?
Yeah.
It's,
yeah.
You know, there's a lot to learn.
I hear you. I would only allow positive things said around my babies. There was a family member who came over and started calling my little newborn boy Smelly. And I was like, you're just not doing that ever again. Like, you know, he'd go, hi there, Smelly. I'm like, no, never.
And the birth stories that mothers get when they're pregnant, my God, shove them out of the room. You know, they don't need that. Go watch orgasmic birth, you know.
exactly. It's a great film. I guess it brings up a really good question. That story is, how can a dad, I mean, it's been such an intimate experience for the mum from the time the baby maybe's 10, 12, 14 weeks old. They've felt every kick. Oh my God, when the babies are on your cervix, when they've gone down, oh, you really feel them.
Right.
How can the dad bond with that baby as like being a real human connected being,
Well, that's the trick. And I kind of compare it to adoption. In a way. At birth, a dad is adopting a baby.
Yeah.
The baby is put into his arms, and it's like, oh, because he didn't have that physiological connection. However, the more he dotes over the mother, the more he listens to her belly, the more he talks to her belly, the more he massages her, the more he loves her, because loving her is loving the baby. It absolutely gets translated through her being into the baby. Yeah. And so I made a Fathers to Be toolkit, which I don't actually have any more of, but in it was some pens, and on the pens, and this was to replace the cigar ritual. I don't know if Australia ever did that, but America used to have the thing with cigars. A dad would give out cigars to his friends. I have a new baby, right? Well, the pen, it was to replace that ritual. And on the pen, it says, "My baby loves me." And it's like, and that's a brain stopper, because, well, my baby, and this is in the womb, right? This is before the birth. If a dad understands that that baby loves him as he loves that baby, love is reciprocal. I can say I love this glass of water, but there's no reciprocation there. In the human kingdom, there's reciprocation when love's involved. Yeah. And he's loving the baby, and the baby is loving him back. That is huge. If he just gets that, then my goodness, you can just see the energy going between hearts. You can just feel it. And it's
oxytocin, isn't it? I mean, how do we bond with anyone, anything? We have friendships. We bond with our pets. Man and his dog kind of thing. Like it's just that repetition, that eye contact, and that touch, the openness,
and talking. If you got a fear, talk about it. If something comes up, talk about it. And if it doesn't feel quite comfortable talking to her about it, then go talk to a professional, or talk to your best friend, or talk to a therapist, or because guys can feel a little vulnerable letting their guard down. They're supposed to be the macho man, right? The guard, the protect and provide and all that. Well, yes and no, and this another thing that happens at birth, which is the ultimate paradox. And I have a slide presentation I do on this PowerPoint where when a woman is giving birth, she's using this great big energy, right? This rough. Well, that's typically in our culture considered to be kind of masculine. A whole lot of muscle, a whole lot of physical, some noise, that's considered kind of masculine, but she's doing the most feminine act a woman could do, right? She's giving birth. The other side of that coin is the guy. Well, now he's watching this. He's not supposed to be doing this big physical masculine energy stuff, right? He's the other side of the coin. He's supposed to be doing nothing but doing it well. He's supposed to be being still. He's supposed to be holding the space. So, but nobody told him, right? And so there's a role reversal that happens right there. And it's like, how unusual is that? She's doing a masculine thing, doing a feminine thing, and he's supposed to be doing a feminine thing, doing a masculine thing. It's like,
I kind of like almost think that's the ultimate masculine. Like if you're familiar at all with the work of like David Data, the third stage male and everything like that, he writes about like his philosophies that he teaches. I mean, this is a separate issue, although it's connected. His philosophies that he teaches are that, the ultimate masculinity is like that sense of nothingness, of death, of just, and you have to be the third stage male, you have to hold that space of nothingness, complete emptiness, and hold that space there for your woman to come into and be nurtured, but that's a whole other philosophy. It's quite in-depth, and I recommend anyone to read anything by David Data. He's a brilliant mind out there on this.
Well, the surrender is so important. And, fragile male egos, you know, are a challenge to deal with for birth professionals and for the man himself. If he was raised as a tough guy, you know, and all that stuff, there's some work to do to get down to those other layers that are most important during this time, and just surrender, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, do you want to tell us anything, like, can people come and do courses with you or join your community? How do they do that?
Well, I haven't, I'm doing a talk next week in Houston at a birth fair, but other than that, I don't really have much going on. These last 3 years, I've been building tiny homes. I came back, I was in England for 16 years, and I came back to the States 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And then for the last 3 years, I've been building tiny homes. And so, you know, I just haven't been doing the work. You know, I have the books out there, but I just haven't been in that flow. It would be nice to get back in it again, but.
So are you in a tiny home now? Is that what we can see that you're in?
Yeah, this is my grandkids' loft. My picture is pretty small here, so I can't quite see what you can see.
Oh, yeah. Oh, beautiful.
I've got, my bedroom is a master bedroom up here with a queen size bed and 3 closets, but this is the loft for the grandkids where this ladder goes up. I'm not sure how much you can see.
So what do you think about the next generation of people who are so passionate about, you know, tiny homes and tiny house culture? Like, is there room enough to have a water birth in one of those?
Well, there could be room. Mine are like 12 feet wide, which is what, almost 3.5 meters or something in your language. Rather than the little skinny ones. So there's actually room, but the weight is the trickier part. You know, I've actually got room for a small tub here, but I don't know. You could do it, but it would be a squeeze.
You'd have to build a special one where the floors are like reinforced so you can have like a big jacuzzi on them. How exciting. Do you have some ideas to tell us about how that dads and dads-to-be can support breastfeeding?
Oh my God. I've got a whole presentation I do on breastfeeding. It is my favorite topic of all the parts because, again, dads haven't been informed. They don't have a clue how important it is for the baby and the mother. Now, there's several layers to it. One can be sexual. Here's this someone else taking over my breasts, you know, what have been what I think are my breasts, right? My playthings, my sensual territory, right? Well, and totally normal guys can have these thoughts. And if they don't know that that's just a thought and there's a way to have a new thought rather than that thought, then guilt comes in, of course. And so then you end up in this terrible spiral that isn't fun to go down. But they haven't been informed that So the baby, they don't know the baby. Like I said, that's an adoption going on here, right? So they don't really have, most of them, much of a relationship with this new child. And if it's a male child, it can be a more exaggerated response than a female child. Subconscious, this isn't a bad guy having intentional thoughts about another male being with breasts that I used to get to be with. It's our culture. It's the enculturation of how we're raised and all of that. So if he understands that not only does it prevent future breast cancer for the mother and prevent future reproductive system problems for the mother if she has a baby and breastfeeds, and postpartum depression is less, and there's a whole litany of things that are for the mother. Because he has a more formative relationship with the mother, it's really important that he knows these things that are benefits for the mother. For the father, for the baby, there's a whole list of them too, the nutrition, the bonding, all those kind of things, in a way that's less significant to him because he doesn't know the child. He knows the mother, not the child. So both he needs to know about, but the mother part is really important. If he knows that this woman he loves is going to be safer on the long term, she's going to be healthier, she's going to be emotionally more balanced, she's going to, you know, all these different things that are a benefit to her, then it's more easy to support her. Because too many guys come along and they go, oh, let's do a bottle so I can feed too. And you know what the statistics are on within a few weeks, the guy's just walking off and deciding not to do the bottle feeding and let mom do it. And then by that time, of course, it's spoiled the breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, breastfeeding, it's not best. It's beyond best. You know, it's like, it's so important. The nutrients the baby gets, the first milk, the colostrum, and, you know, there's just so much about it, and that connection. And there's also, a woman has done a paper on this, and I don't remember who, the significance of the non-feeding parent, that the father has the opportunity to have an emotional, loving connection with the baby that isn't dependent on food. Because the baby's relationship is very dependent on food. And there's a whole lot more going on than just the food. But the father has this opportunity to be there in another way, which is really wonderful. And if he realizes that, oh, I'm giving and receiving something over here that's really special and important for this child's life, which it is. And it's different than the mother's role right now.
It's so special. We're actually going to have a Learning to Breastfeed webinar series as well. So we'll definitely have you here to talk more about in depth all the things that you've brought up there, because I mean that's a whole other basket of goodies to unpack in there. Thank you so much for your time, Patrick.
You bet.
Yeah, it's been beautiful speaking, and like quite a revelation, a lot of the things you've said. I'm so glad the world has you to be like a positive kind of force for, you know, good and, you know, strong masculinity in this world. So I guess before you go, I'll just ask you a question and you can answer it any way you like. I like to ask a really general question to leave off. But I guess, Patrick, what is your personal vision for what the world will look like when it has a strong, present, you know, positive masculinity at play in it?
There's a meme on Facebook that's been going around that it says, a woman should be in every room that a decision is made. And this has to do with politics in the United States right now, as well as other layers of things. And if men grow to appreciate the understanding that we're in a cooperative universe here, that we're in a collective, a masculine, feminine collective, and that women have so much to offer on every level, but we've all been entrained into this patriarchy, you know, men and women both. We've all been on this trajectory of our culture that fortunately is changing, but boy, there's so much darn momentum behind it that it's like, you know, turning around a tanker at sea or something, you know. But it's just so important to acknowledge and recognize the value we both bring to all of life. And we're not doing it alone, we're doing it together, and we need to welcome the support and the collective thoughts and contributions from both genders.
That's very special, and I think a lot of the listeners will be really appreciative that you've said that and you've voiced that. So thank you so much, Patrick, for being with us.
Thank you, Akash, for your contribution to our humanity.
Thank you, Patrick.
It's really important what you're doing.
There's a lot of love behind this, and I've been really grateful all the voices who have come forward and adopted the mission of like learning to birth as you know, something that they should be supporting and something that can help people like yourself you know, fulfill your mission of getting your ideas out to the world. So very much happy that we've had this conversation. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for being on the Learning to Birth webinar series.
Many blessings.
All right. Bye-bye.